Hello, everyone. I'm Ilan, and this is John. Welcome to
How
the
are you?
sixth edition of our podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about the ethics of gene editing. So, John, I think you want to get us started off.
Yeah. So I think probably the first thing that we should do is look at one of the only gene editing tools that we have at the moment, and that is CRISPR. So CRISPR basically is a tool called uh, it's called Cas9 protein, and basically what the Cas9 protein is it's a DNA scissors. Um, so at the moment, what we're using it for is if we want to give something like E. coli a gene for producing vitamin D, right? We take our gene and put in the Cas9. It cuts the DNA of the E. coli, and then some of the E. coli will take the gene and some won't, and then you just select for the ones that have taken it. So that's basically the gist of it. Um, it's not exactly a, a perfect model yet, but but it is kind of considered like the medical advances that are understood will come from CRISPR are fairly significant. Like obviously, one aspect of it is that it can, we could remove the possibility of some genetic defects like Huntington's disease. Um, and yeah, things along that kind of line. Um, so really, yeah, what we're talking about today, of course, is how how we would do that, should we do that, and so on and so forth. What do you think on the ethics side of things?
So, so first, I want just a little bit of more information. How long has this been around for?
It's not really around that long. The really interesting thing about it is that people are doing it out of their garages. Um,
Oh, wow.
yeah. There's a guy in the States. He's actually been sued for medical malpractice, despite the fact that he's not a doctor. And he's he's literally selling these kits out of his garage that you can inject yourself with. Um, and I don't know exactly what they're supposed to be doing, but basically, uh, if somebody in the States, you might know what board it is better than I do, but they went after him for basically performing medical procedures when
He doesn't have
uh,
any licensing or.
he doesn't. Yeah, he's never been a doctor. Like, it's not that he's been disparaged or not disparaged,
Yeah.
uh, but he's like, all I do is I sell this shit from my garage. I'm not treating anybody.
Hmm.
Um, so I can kind of see where he's coming from, and I can kind of see where they're coming from as well. Like, it is kind of a questionable area, but if he's able to sell kits that, like, okay, so one big example in Ireland would be cystic fibrosis, right? If you could if you could sell some sort of contraption that you inhale this thing, it has a medley of, whatever that that it has Cas9 in it and all the rest, and it goes into your lungs, and it causes some of your cells to become healthy enough that they modify the environment, because that's actually what makes you sick. It's that your environment is different from a healthy person's, and there's a particular bacteria that kind of attacks you then because of it's all around us. It's all around us, but it doesn't attack people who are healthy because the environment isn't suitable for growth. Um, whereas if you have cystic fibrosis, it's a better environment for it to grow. There's other things in cystic fibrosis as well, like scar tissue and all of that. But this is one of the ways that it can wind up killing you.
Okay. So are most of the applications of, sorry, what's the technology called again?
CRISPR. So it's
CRISPR. Are
CRISPR, and it stands for clustered, regularly interspaced, short palindromic repeats, which is
Right.
just like, you know, sequences that occur over and over again. And it's basically, you can just clip them where you see these
Right.
sequences.
So
Um,
are the applications of this right now purely medical, or do you think have people been talking about there being some more potential applications for this kind of technology?
well, I think at the moment, almost none of them are medical. That's kind of the problem, is that this guy is going ahead with medical, like it's essentially experiments on humans. Okay, like there are humans that have volunteered, like maybe they've got cancer. Like one of the things that he's trying to do is he's trying to cure cancers with it, by, I don't know, slowing down the metabolic rate of cancer or something like that. I don't know exactly how he's doing it, but and uh, but like the more, I don't think the ethical problem is really in medical treatment. I think everybody would agree that if we could
That's,
cure these
yeah,
diseases,
right. So that's what I'm
it's
trying to get
generally a
to.
good thing.
So yeah, what's the scope of the medical issues? So are we talking? So if this, could you with this technology, for example, change like your traits, the traits of a person,
In
like
theory, yeah, yeah,
okay.
you
So
could.
that's where we get
Um,
into some ethical issues, right?
that's, yeah, that's a big part of it. Like, okay, so considering we understand the overall structure and the overall behavior of your DNA, but we don't really understand what this particular piece does. So this particular piece could be responsible um, for preventing cancer. And if you go messing with that particular piece, that person could wind up having uh, multi-systemic tumors in a year from now.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the main ethical issue with just giving, like,
So testing is also iffy right now because
because you need live. Uh,
live,
you kind of,
yeah,
yeah, you kind of need to do it on a human in order to test it. Like, you know, these sequences are
for it
in
to be
everything. They're in,
replicable.
sorry, yeah, because these sequences are everywhere, right? They're in mice and bacteria and everything, really. So, um, and they're believed to have some function in your immune response, that it kind of helps you store. One of the theories, anyway, is that it helps you store um, uh, information of previous attacks, so that if you have a recurrent infection, you can respond to it quicker. But yeah, so in terms of the but we don't know. That's kind of the big problem.
Yeah.
Um, and if it were to cause you to have tumors, who would you turn to? Would you turn to the person that you bought the drug from, or would you turn to the government, or your insurance company? Um, so that's kind of where a lot of the concerns come in. Obviously, there's a whole other side of things that kind of that comes into play, because the DNA in your eye is the same as the DNA in your foot. And by messing around with that DNA, could you grow an eye on your foot? You know, and that kind of side of things is
Right. So
part of it.
it's largely untested and could
It's
lead
the
to
unknown. The
yeah,
unknown is the really
and could lead
concerning
to
part.
basically anything as far as we're concerned.
Yeah, and then like some of the potential upsides of it, like from a government point of view, would be that like you could create super soldiers, you could
Yes.
eradicate disease.
Right.
Uh, yeah, so there's a couple of kind of there's
Yeah.
the pros are massive, but the cons are they require a lot of smoothing out before we roll this out
So
on any
yeah. So I want to
large.
maybe go more into that this idea of editing, of gene editing as a form of enhancing your traits or picking certain traits or qualities in people, because
Right.
as of right now there's there's aren't really, right, like basically we're all biologically very similar, right, in terms of Like,
None of us glow in the dark. Like, it's
yeah, exactly. None of us glow in the dark. There's bigger differences, like, for example, within races than between races, right? Between nationalities, between different groups of people. And I think where a lot of the questions come in on the ethics of gene editing is who would have access to this, right? And could this could the next frontier of inequality be that some people actually have increased cognitive capacity, increased physical abilities just because they have access to it? And this creating a subclass and an upper class that's actually reinforced by biology.
yeah. I hadn't really thought of that, but I suppose that would be a significant concern. I suppose like I'd be more worried about like okay, the benefits are huge. So
Yeah.
would that mean that countries, especially the US and China, um, would they throw the ethical handbook out the window if they, once you open Pandora's box, is it just open? Like,
That's the thing, right? And that's like what we talked about with AI, is that there's an infinity of possibilities as to where that could take you, right?
yeah. And the predictable ones are actually the less scary ones. It's like
Yeah.
a solution is out there that you haven't thought of is the really concerning part. Um,
Yeah. So
but
that's
I do think it's going to happen anyway. So
right.
it's
So this is actually discussed in the book Sapiens. I don't know if you've
right.
read it.
No, I haven't. No.
It's so yeah, his bit. So he talks about human history and
Right.
society and a number of things, but um, his chapter on the future is very concerned with genetic modification as a means of creating these inequalities. So, like, he talks about human history and how, there used to be several species of humans, right?
Yep.
Uh, which died out, and Homo sapiens became the only kind of humans. And our kind of historical arguments and ideas of superiority and inferiority are basically ground in myths of biological superiority, of spiritual superiority, of whatever you want to call it. And the real danger is that with genetic modification, these myths become reality, and some people actually have superior biology to others, right? And that's where you can see, I mean, we live in a very unequal world already, but that's where you could see something like, what's that Matt Damon movie where the rich people live in the space station and the poor people live on Earth? You know what I'm talking
Yeah,
about?
I've seen it, but I can't remember what it's called.
Yeah. So that's basically
Uh,
what he's afraid of, right? The rich people can cure any disease, are young, beautiful forever, and live on this utopia. And while the
well,
poor people kind of slum it out.
I do think that's relatively unlikely because if if the current Cas9 was like if it was proven to be um, safe for use for everyday use, it's actually incredibly cheap to make.
Is it?
Uh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay.
It's basically just a protein, a protein and a little piece of code that like a gene itself isn't particularly long. You can get them made for a couple of £100. Um, you can get sequences essentially handmade for a couple of £100, and yeah. So I like obviously because
So
this is a first stage. You might find that like a third generation or fourth generation, much like iPhones, they get more expensive with time, and you realize that the first generation and second generation aren't worth piss really.
and
Uh,
also you're talking about relative features of different models, right? So like you'll have the cheap versions that everyone has access to, and then you'll have the real maybe cutting edge super advanced version that maybe only the rich can afford, right?
Yeah, like like, or maybe the rich will have 100 different
Yeah,
modifications, and your average person will have like two or three or something like that. But it should be a relatively affordable thing. Like, you know, I don't think you're going to get to the point where you've got like the 1% are buying this kind of stuff and then nobody else can afford it. That's not in a developer's best interest anyway. Like, he wants to sell it to as many people as possible. Um,
right, right.
like, that's just good business, like, you know. But and yeah, so I think it probably, I don't think that side of things is very likely. Of course, it's just too hard to tell, isn't it? Like, you know.
So what does primarily worry you about um, the ethics of gene editing? Is it the super soldiers idea?
Not particularly. No, actually, I think so. Like, overall, I would be for gene editing. I think it's a good idea, but where I would kind of draw the line is that I think it's something that has to be monitored very carefully. Now, okay, I'll give you an example, right?
Yeah.
So, sickle cell anemia, right, is a disease that is very prevalent in Africa, more prevalent in Africa than anywhere else on the planet, and and on face value, it is absolutely useless, redundant disease that the human race could not possibly want.
Right.
Um, so you might be inclined to go, let's go down to Africa, give all of them this CRISPR,
Yeah.
and completely edit out sickle, sickle cell anemia out of the entire global um, uh, like population.
Gene pool. Yeah.
Initially, based on the information I've given you so far, that sounds like a great idea, doesn't it?
Yes.
But where sickle cell anemia kind of comes into its own is that it dramatically increases your survivability for malaria.
Oh.
And um, so, from the point of view that there's a whole host of diseases out there that we've not encountered, diseases that might be forming as we speak, you know, things that don't exist today but could exist a year from now, or 5 years from now, or 100 years from now. It is not beneficial to reduce the diversity in our gene pool in any way, even for diseases. Even if it costs us money to keep somebody with Huntington's alive for a couple of years and for them to die a horrible death. And Huntington's is an awful way to die. But there could be a point in the future where it's it's the only thing, that little bit of diversity is the only thing that the human race can survive through. You know, that like there's some sort of bottleneck event, and somehow Huntington's or something like that is the thing that helps us
Ooh,
to
this is a
survive it.
really interesting moral quandary, um, because you're talking about the possibility that that's the bottleneck, right? That one is
Uh,
the bottleneck, or are you
yeah, so
talking
like,
about, or does taking one piece out dilute the whole picture just a little bit?
um, so okay, like, um, yeah, like I maybe Huntington's is a bad example because it's always fatal,
And
but
also, yeah, that's yeah,
but even sickle cell anemia, right? We'll say if there's a zombie apocalypse in the future, right?
right.
Just go with me on this one.
Let's do it.
Zombie apocalypse in the future, just like I Am Legend, and only 1% of the population survive, and that 1% happen to be the people who have the gene for sickle cell anemia. Um, if we remove that now, then everybody, when that situation comes up, everybody will get it. Um, so it will improve us up until that point, but then when we get there, it wipes us out.
So, does it become a question of what do we take out, if anything?
Uh, yeah, that's where I would fall down on it.
Okay,
I would say that you'd want to be keeping this to the minimum
to the
first of
minimum.
all,
Okay.
um,
So,
and
can you do this to people who already have the okay, so like when do you get, for example, Huntington's disease? Is it genetic? It's
Huntington's is genetic. It's caused from uh, I think it's a dominant trait. Um, so you're familiar with your dominant and recessive traits,
yes,
right? So so basically, if you're, I think it's more common in women. Um, so if you get one of these genes, you just one of the two, you will get Huntington's. So
right,
cystic fibrosis then is the opposite. So you need both parents to be a
right,
carrier of one of the genes, and then you need the right combination. So even if both parents are a carrier, there's only a 25% chance
yeah,
that a child will get it. Whereas with Huntington's, if one parent has it, uh, if it's a mother, it's 50%, and I think if the father has it, it might be 100%,
yeah,
100% chance to pass it on. But it's much less frequent in men than it is uh, for women, as far as I'm aware. Um, but yeah, so like if you pass on, if you have the gene, you're getting the disease. There's no two ways about it. That's about the limit of my understanding of the disease, apart from like that it kills you about 40 or 50 or in that kind of threshold. I don't quite understand what it does in the body to talk kill you.
right.
Um,
So so a living person with Huntington's, could you remove that that strand of DNA that
with yeah, with Cas9 now, I don't think so, but with some version of Cas9 in the future, and they're working on it all the time, trying to come up with not just improved versions, but various versions. So like a version that like Cas9 doesn't work in this situation, but we'll call it Cas10
yeah. So
does.
maybe you wouldn't take out the trait for like asthma, but something like Huntington's or uh, the maybe like something that will, because that's where I'm trying to think of the ethics component of this is that so you would not develop this technique and condemn people to with Huntington's to an early death over the concern of diluting the what's it called, the diversity of
Well, that's
genetic material.
yeah, that's the ethical issue.
Yeah,
Um, it's that so the individual benefit versus the population benefit, or the benefit for the population. Um, and like there might be no short-term benefit for the population anyway, but we don't know is kind of the
right.
and once it's out there, it's too hard to take back. Really, like we've got um, we've got some case studies of trying to remove something from the population after it has been introduced, and it's incredibly difficult to do. Um, Borderline impossible. Like most scientists would probably just tell you it's impossible.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Like basically impossible.
yeah, yeah. It's so close to impossible that for functional purposes it is impossible.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, so yeah, so those people that would say that like the risk to the population outweighs the benefits to the individual, um, they would say it's never worth the risk. And that's kind of that's what people are talking about. That's why it's a debate at all, because
right.
the medical benefits are so massive, but they're medical benefits to an individual or a group of individuals.
Yeah, yeah.
It doesn't actually matter to the overall survival of the human species if
Right, right, right.
your relative dies at 40 or 50 from Huntington's. Like
Yeah,
the human race doesn't care. Individuals do, but the human race doesn't. So
yeah,
it's pretty callous, but that's kind of the discussion at place, as far as I see it.
yeah. Wow. So would there be no way to so I guess once you've removed those traits, that's it. Like it doesn't because I
You could potentially store them in some sort of
that's what I'm thinking. Like as they have like how a bunch of different countries have like smallpox and polio and other eradicated diseases.
Yeah,
stored.
yeah. You potentially could store them. I
I mean,
I've never I've never thought of like rolling out a program where like, oh, we, like just sticking with the I Am Legend example.
yeah,
I've never really thought of like, oh, just on the off chance that one of these genes that we removed is the cure, we're just going to pump it out into the environment and um,
hope for the
you
best.
know hope for the best. Yeah, I don't know if that's a feasible option, or maybe it is, maybe it isn't, or maybe you'd have like a community of volunteers that keep the gene alive or something like that. Um, the possibilities are endless, really, aren't they? But I'd say like if if Huntington's was common at all in my community, and I was aware of cheap vaccine-like injection that I could get that would 100% remove that risk of dying a slow, painful death in my
At an
40s.
early age.
Yeah, I would 100% be taking
Yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah.
You're not going to go, oh, wait, what about the risk of
But
global pandemic?
yeah,
Even now, I wouldn't,
even
even in
now,
today's climate, I wouldn't
yeah,
take that into account for a second.
yeah.
I'd probably want to,
See, that's the thing, is that we've had kind of these conversations before on the relative value of life, right?
yeah.
So, like, if you have to choose this group of people to save versus this group of people to save, who do you save? Or like, um, what's worth more, the entire human race dying out or half the people dying and life continuing, right? You and I have had these kinds of discussions on um,
Yeah.
what's what you consider to be the right thing to do. And I mean, these are ethical questions. There's no right or wrong answer on the value of life, but um, I think most people would err on the side of alleviate the suffering for people when you can, and uh, over the concerns of the global. Yeah,
Yeah, but like it's kind of only when it boils down to aesthetics and stuff like that. Like, you wanting your kid to have blue eyes. That's a you know that's a
right.
pretty
I mean,
stupid reason
yeah, yeah.
for such a change. Um, like, as a blue eyed person, I can see why, but no, it's just like, that once the risk at that point is just never going to be worth it. And like, I would never advocate for gene editing where it's only for aesthetic reasons. Um, in terms of like super soldiers and stuff like that, or like China might decide that rather than just super soldiers, they want their entire population to be uh,
Yeah,
physically stronger, and it's possible. Like, it's not
yeah. And I mean,
it's
also
not
the danger is, we don't really fully understand the brain. We don't understand it well at all, actually. And who knows what kind of advances could push mental capacity, like a limitless situation. Um,
yeah, yeah, like well, in terms of the um, brain advancements, I'd personally be more inclined to hold out for the Neuralink by Elon Musk.
oh,
Um,
is that like
it's a
everyone can
computer
talk to
that's
each other?
Yeah, so I think the idea is that eventually it will go inside your head, but it's basically just it's a way to. I think the general idea is that it stops AI from ever taking over, because humans essentially become AI. So that you can just Google search something inside your
It's
head
kind of
whenever you want.
the dog biting its own tail.
Uh, yeah, well, it's like you
In
can't
like,
beat me.
you
You
can't
can't
beat me
beat me
because
as long as
I've become you, right?
yeah,
You
yeah, yeah,
can't
yeah.
beat them, join them, basically.
Yeah, that's basically it. It's like because AI is better than us at so many things, right? But but if we have an AI that will die if we die, it's in its best interest to keep us alive.
Right.
Although, like, that's,
And
yeah, that's
yeah, and also like that even goes to the idea of what even is a human, which we talked about
yeah,
in our last
yeah.
podcast.
All these things are linked, man. They're all
They
linked.
are.
Uh,
I mean, that's the thing. If you, and also if you look back 50, 60, 100 years ago, even the ethics regarding treatment of animals has completely changed, and how we think of animals and their value and their worth. Like people buying products that are cruelty free, um,
yeah,
not people going vegetarian they because of the impact on animals. These are ethical concerns that have only really become mainstream not that long ago, and with technology moving the way it is, gene editing and things like that are and AI and things like that are going to be the new ethical questions that society is going to have to grapple with, right?
yeah. But like, I don't think it's really, okay. There are people in the community who are saying that this should never be rolled out.
You're
Um,
talking about gene
but
editing.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But it's not as it's a fairly small group. It's kind of like the debate between like over global warming. Most of the people who are um, non-biased and know what they're talking about agree that this is something that we're going to have to bring in some respect. So it's not like the whole vegan debate or anything like that. Like, I think that there's multiple good arguments for and against veganism and stuff like that.
Yeah,
But with this, I think the consensus seems to be that it's a good idea and that to some extent it's a tool that we should use. It's just like, how much can we use it without it actually becoming more damaging than beneficial?
right. Yeah, yeah. And how is it used is the big question, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's really like, how is it used is really the
Because
number one
I mean, yeah, like
concern.
that's another big question with the ethics of anything is humans not being the most benevolent of actors. um,
Yeah,
on a society, on a nationwide level, on an individual level, humans are not very good at making purely rational or positive decisions, and very easy for any technology or any advancement to be used for negative effects. But I mean, I kind of see this debate, not this debate, but debates about advancing technology. We talked about AI last week in general,
mm-hmm.
and I see it as kind of people see it as the Pandora's box, where once it's open, you'll never get it back, and it'll be the end of society. Well, people were saying the same things about nuclear weapons. Those have been around for what 75 years now, and I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
yeah, and I mean, there's still risk,
I think
there's still
I think
danger.
nuclear weapons are very much a Pandora's box. Like, if they're used, that it,
Yeah,
it's fairly catastrophic. Like,
no, I agree with you, but that even with all of the negative actors and even with all of the ill intention and uh, insecurity and danger surrounding them, there's been kind of this global consensus on how to deal with them and this ethics on their use, which has sprung up and has prevented it from being catastrophic so far. And
yeah,
I'm not to say that it's not going to cause a big problem in the future. Just to say that you know when these things when new technology comes out that seems like could be the end of everything, you know, it's you don't know how it will be contained and how it will be managed. So I mean,
yeah. Well, I do agree with you, but I think that there's a medical example that almost directly contradicts that. Um, so you've heard of thalidomide,
Thalidomide.
thalidomide. It's basically, it was an antiemetic for pregnant women back in the 1960s or something like that. Um, so
Oh,
basically, the idea was that if you're feeling nauseous, you take one of these pills.
uh-huh.
Uh, and when the children were born, all the kids had birth defects of one variety or another. There's a couple of countries where it was rolled out. I don't think it was on a global scale, but Ireland and the US were two of those countries, and and those people are still alive today. I don't think it particularly limits your lifespan, although I could be wrong on that. But I know that there are still some of them out there, so they'd be about 50 now. Um, and those, so like that, basically what happened there was that they took a drug, went, look, we've checked everything, it's fine, and pushed it through. And the problem with thalidomide was that in the body it racemizes, which is a chemistry term for you know the way your hands look like each other,
Yeah.
but if you try to put them on top of each other, they don't mix.
Yep.
So basically, if something is racemic, your your so we'll say your hand pivots around this point, right?
Yeah.
So if it's racemic, it can kind of uh, all the different points can kind of move around the one point. I don't know if I'm kind of butchering that, but the idea is that no matter what way you turn it, it looks the same. So you can put them on top of each other, or you can put them like that, or whatever, right? And they always fit into each other. Um, so yeah, so like it's called chirality and like handedness, where the left version and the right version, even though they've got the same structure, they're different, right? So basically, what happens with thalidomide is that this version, we'll say, is the one that you use um, to treat nausea in pregnant women, and it works fine. But what happens in the body is it racemizes, so it converts from only this one to about 50-50. And this one is the one that causes the birth defect. So they had tested this one, but they hadn't tested this one.
Yeah. 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 Okay. I see what you're saying.
So, uh, so, and that was with all of the advances that they had made up until about 1960, which was still a lot of pharmaceutical advances. Um, and they just overlooked one thing in an effort to get this drug out to market, and it backfired.
Yeah.
So there's no limit to how many ways that chemistry and
Something
physics and
can
stuff
mess up.
will surprise us. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
definitely.
So
And I'm not saying there are no risks to these technologies. We've talked about them. There's extensive risks and extensive ways that they can go wrong. I'm just commenting on the general fear of new technology in general,
yeah,
and the existential dread around new technology, which has gotten greater as our technology has gotten scarier and more global and more uh,
and
ex-
our lives have just gotten easier as well. So we've more time to spend worrying about this kind of stuff, like
well,
uh,
that's the other thing. Yeah.
first world problems, like worrying about a drug that isn't even on the market.
Yeah. Mm, exactly. And yeah, something that's what I'm saying. Like something like gene editing obviously has many potential negative uses, but does that mean we should never look into it? And that's kind of what I'm saying in general is that, you know, like you look at so much technology that has been developed to kill people, right? So many, I mean, military technology back in the day was always the most advanced because the one who had the most advanced military technology was in control, could easily overcome their opponent, right?
Yeah.
And now that now that we've evolved kind of past um, that 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 way of kind of that thinking of dominance, right? Like
Do you think
obviously,
we have?
generally, yes. Now obviously countries still want to get a leg up on each other, and there's still competition between countries, and there's still competition between groups, and blah 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 blah. But now I think we spend a lot more of our time and resources towards solutions to making life easier in general, um,
Right. Yeah.
solutions to problems of humanity versus trying to one up each other. I mean,
Mhm.
and there's example. I mean, that's good and bad. There's examples of competition driving a lot of innovation. You just look at the space race, right?
Yeah.
Um, but then competition driving negative technologies like the atomic bomb, right? And I mean, that's the atomic bomb is one use of fission and um, that
And it potentially set
experience.
us on a course that we like, that will turn out to be positive,
Yeah,
but it's just that
that's
we haven't.
exactly. Yeah. So um, yeah, I think now there's a real danger of retrenching into uh, old fears um, of otherness and of identity that used to rule the day. Um, and that's what worries me more than the advancement of technology.
Yeah.
Um, Sort of, you can see it in our discourse and our fears and our this kind of a lot of the old fears that we had about people who are different than us and other countries, and um, they kind of still are so prevalent and now so powerful in the internet age that it brings up this fear of, could this kind of illogical negative mindset be lead to some of these technologies being used in a negative way, you know
Right. Yeah.
that's what worries me more than the general concept of technological advancement, because things are moving whether we want them to or not, you know
Yeah, I agree, and I do think that this is 100% going to be a thing, but and like, yeah, you might as well try to regulate the market. It's kind of like the whiskey in America, like what you call it, like the
Bourbon.
distilleries. No, the like the fucking the moonshiners, like, back in the 30s or whatever it was. Like, that you're not going to get alcohol out of the place. You're not going to prevent this.
Yeah,
You might
prohibition.
as well regulate it. Prohibition, yeah. You might as well try to control the market, because you're never going to eliminate it.
Yep. Yep.
Um, so yeah, hopefully they do kind of come to some sort of consensus on it, because I really do think it's positive. It's got a positive, that it can really bring us forward. And
Yeah, I
like
mean,
I
you talk about like the potential to alleviate human suffering and improve human lives, and at the end of the day, the value of a human life can be defined in many ways, but for me, it's self-contained, right? That's what it is. You have the life, and then that's it, right? So if you can improve that and improve the lives of people in that constellation that surrounds that life, then that by itself is just improving humanity, just by improving the quality of some life, right?
Yeah, like, I suppose, yeah, okay. one kind of is an extension of that is we'll say for argument's sake that everybody on like that we do kind of get rid of some beneficial gene that was going to prevent us from being wiped out, and we everybody has a better life for it for the next 100 years, and then some disease comes along that wipes us out. Whereas it was only going to wipe out all but 100,000 across the planet. Is that actually the tragedy that we make it out to be? Because there's nobody going to be around going, oh, Jesus, do you remember when the humans were here? Nobody's going to give a crap. So, like,
and that's what yeah, exactly, like the value of human life is self-contained, you know, and human life is not the only life.
yeah,
So if you value life, uh, the extinction of humans, while depressing on a personal and um, on a personal scale, and the people around you and everything, in the
mm-hmm.
grand scheme of things, is that a cosmic positive or negative? I mean, to me, you know, we've talked about this before, the question whether you would, the Thanos question, would you kill 50% of the people randomly and
Yeah, yeah.
humanity continue for an indefinite amount of time? Or would you kill nobody and everybody's dead in, what did we say, 50 years, 100 years? Um,
Uh, like, yeah, that
Either
you know
way.
it's going to happen. Rather,
Yeah,
was what we were
yeah.
talking about.
Right, right. Um,
So,
and to me, it's very simple in that there's no fair way to cut, to choose who gets the cut and who doesn't. Like
yeah,
premature, like, you know what I mean? Like like ending potential human life later on does not justify ending actual human life now.
yeah. No, but the question wasn't debatable. Um, for anybody who's listening, this is the idea that yeah. So I think you called it the Thanos question, but basically how I phrased it was a lot of the time when I'm getting to know people, I ask them this question because I just think it's an interesting conversation to have, and it kind of sheds light on their personality um, without actually asking them any details about themselves. It's like having an interesting conversation, but you don't actually have to go, "Oh, where are you from?" You know. So I think I asked you this like one of the first nights we met. It might have been right after we moved in, was it? But
Yeah, maybe like a month in.
but yeah. So the idea is first of all, if you know everybody's going to die in, let's say, 50 years, um, but you have the option of saving the human race forevermore by pressing a button. Um, do you press the button? And
And
like so, the
half
first
and 50% of people die
50% of people die
when you
from
press
you
the
pressing the
button.
button.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So the first part of that question is that it's random, so that you don't know who's going to die. Um, so it could be people in your family, like three
Yeah,
of your family.
you could be
Well,
you.
it could be you. Yeah, yeah. So like the cold, calculated side of you would tell you to press the button because it preserves the human race. And then the more empathetic and emotional side should tell you to not do it because you don't want to be responsible for killing 3 billion people or almost 4 billion people. Um, so that's kind of the question. And then the second part, depending on how you answer the first part, is if you could decide who the people are, like so you
That
might
change your
decide that
answer.
you might decide that the 6 million people living in Ireland are more important than the 3 billion people on the far side of the planet because you don't see them all the time. So, um, and like some people will go, oh well, that changes things. I press the button now, and then other people might go like, that even if they had picked the pressing the button in the first place, they might not now because they actually are picking people to die, right? Um, so yeah, it's kind of based on
Yeah,
it's a multifaceted kind of question, but
yeah.
why
So
were we
that's the
done?
question. Yeah, and yes. So my point is that um, for me, it yeah. So right for me, the choice is between um, is the value of future un future life greater than the value of the existing current life, uh, right?
Yeah.
And to me, it's
It's
not,
not.
because it doesn't exist yet, right? So even if humanity was to all perish, that's a finite value. That's life lived up to that point.
Hmm.
Whereas at, whereas if you get rid of half the population already, that's you know ending the value of that life already. Um, Even if there's the potential for more human life after that, that doesn't make up for it, in my opinion. And it's not
Right.
an
Yeah.
easy question. I mean, to me, it's a simple question, but it's
Well, the whole idea of it is that it's an impossible question because
right, exactly.
even if you have an opinion that you find easy, that doesn't make you right
Yeah, and yeah,
or wrong. Like
yeah.
but,
I think, yeah, it speaks to how you value life, and what you think about
and
life.
there are various versions that you can kind of bring into the mix to keep throwing, like like okay, yeah, okay, in that situation. But what if we change the parameters? So you're talking about future potential. So like if you just go, well, we'll take out so like rather than pressing a button and killing everybody now, you press a button and make 90% of all the people alive sterile. That'd be like the same sort of question, but
Yep.
but now both the parameters are future life.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
um, yeah, so
yeah, yeah. No, tough questions, and yeah, that's the thing about the gene thing that's so interesting, is that it's the very fabric of who you are, right? Um, Biologically, that constitutes, you know, that constitutes who you are, um, and that's why it's such a fraught subject, I think, because it's kind of been this immutable thing that people have not been able to change, and all of a sudden, changing it is within view, even if
yeah,
it's not here yet. And I think that's what scares people and excites others.
yeah. I don't think it's like I think it would be okay to like I wouldn't have a problem with it. Like if I wanted to dye my hair, for example, I just dye my hair, and like my hair color is as much a part of my ID as some piece of DNA that I can't see. Like
Yeah,
um,
absolutely.
or like if I was short sighted, I'd have no problem walking into a clinic and getting laser eye surgery. You know,
As I have.
I mean, if I was more short sighted, I am short sighted, but yeah. So I think a lot of the problems that people project onto something like this is just because it's a major advancement and it's kind of fear. Um,
Right. Yeah.
the likelihood is that it's not actually that big a deal, and as long as it's done safely, it's not that big a deal. And like if somebody was shining a laser into your eye and they hadn't the training done, you'd be you'd be understandably nervous. You should be nervous in that situation. But when they have the training done and when
Yeah.
they've taken all the necessary precautions, you shouldn't be nervous because the chances of it going wrong are lower than you having a crash on the way home.
Right. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, exactly. And yeah, it's that fear of the unknown. And, like you see on social media, those things like, you're not ugly, you're just poor. And like all of these celebrities who have had, plastic surgery done, and
Right? Yeah.
all this kind
Is
of
it
stuff.
Kylie or
Yeah,
Kendall
the
Jenner that looks
one
like
of them.
completely different? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, that's usually the big example, right?
Mm.
Shows how much we know about pop culture. And um,
I'm not apologizing for that one.
but people don't have a problem with that, like
Yeah.
it's it's only because it's this foundational, like this idea of one man. And I think that that's actually an underrated part of it, is the foundation for all man is the same, right? It's almost religious, like God created man in his image, right? And kind of, I think people have a fear of playing God. Uh, well, some people have a fear, some people get a kick off of it, but it just pushes you deeper into that thing of like, now you're really messing uh, with the design here, so you got to get it
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, well, that is somewhat true, though. It's not a point that you can discard, despite the fact that like I'm not worried about playing God, um, but this is a design that has been created um, over many millions of years, and the way it is it's there for a reason. There are some things that are redundant, like uh, your baby toe apparently is just it's
Listed.
only there for the crack.
Yeah,
Yeah, your appendix. You don't need it.
yeah, yeah,
It is definitely something that we could do without overall because of you know without medical treatment it would be killing a lot more people than it is. Um, so like I do get that the design is there for a reason, but as things become redundant in your workplace, if something becomes redundant, you cut it out. You stop doing it. And you streamline your processes. And really, that's all we're doing here is we're streamlining our processes.
yeah,
And yeah, so.
yeah, yeah. And I mean, look, who knows where it's going to be in 50, 60 years. Like that's still within the possible scope of our lifetimes. And that's kind of the crazy thing about it is that, yeah, maybe, you know, for example, like great grandchildren or grandchildren will be having same conversations about, what's it called? About the ethics of uh, human AI interbreeding or whatever.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's possible. Hopefully not. You never know. In 60 years, we might look younger than we do now.
This
So
is true. I
uh,
mean, you can always hold out hope.
I'd say it's unlikely. But all right, man. Will we leave it there?
We shall. All right.
Okay.
So,
All right, guys. Um, as per usual, if you want to engage in the conversation, go down to the comment section. We're going to try and get uh, interacting a lot more with people over the last couple of podcasts we've done, and we'll be hoping to hear your thoughts on things. And until then, take care.
see ya.